Hello, my name is Nathan Moody. I am going to be doing a patch for you this morning on a rainy Northern California morning. What we have here is a modular synthesizer that I called the Blue Box for probably obvious reasons. Across the top, the modules we'll be using today are an IntelliGel I/O module and an IntelliGel quad attenuator. Most of the modules that we'll be using today are from Whimsical Wraps. So there are two Mannequins Mangroves, which are VCOs, Just Friends, which is a multi-purpose module, but today we'll be using it as an envelope generator, Three Sisters, which is a formant filter, and Cold Mac, which is a utility, and today we'll be using this exclusively as an audio mixer. We will also be using the Make Noise LXD, low pass gate, Mutable Instruments Clouds running Parasites firmware. We have a Dixie Mark I, which will be used as an LFO, and a Tirana sequencer from Chaos Devices. And then, of course, the single largest module is the actual Sputnik modular touchplate keyboard. So the patch I want to make today, I want there to be three voices. I need a bass line, I need a melody, and I need some sort of percussive sound to kind of anchor it, but I kind of been feeling like I don't want a four on the floor kick or something. I want something that has a little bit of polyrhythm to it, or at least an unusual meter relative to what the other elements are doing. So I've already started a little bit just by simply literally working backwards in terms of patching. So the line out, which is going into an audio interface directly via balanced XLR cables out of the back. That's being fed by clouds. I'm going to run the entire mix through clouds. And then I have a left and right input into clouds, and that is going to be coming out of the Cold Mac left and right main output. So the way I usually start every single patching session is by tuning. So one of the things I've learned over the years is that I always pre-patch the voltage source before tuning the oscillators, because it makes a difference. Sometimes 0 volts theoretically coming out of a sequencer is not exactly 0 volts. So what I tend to use is these little Korg chromatic CA1 tuners, which are super handy. So I'm going to just go ahead and patch that into, say, the left Mannequins module first. So now I need a voltage going into its pitch. So let's see. This one I want to be the melody. So I'm going to take the primary kind of CV out of the touchplate keyboard. I'm going to try to find a slightly shorter cable. Yeah, that wouldn't be all right. And then we'll go from its CV output into the pitch output. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the patch cable I just dropped, and I'm going to feed the second Mangrove's pitch by the CV output of the Tirana sequencer. Right now the sequencer is on step 1. And in fact, I'm going to hit C on the keyboard here just to make sure that it's outputting a C. And then I'm just going to turn on my handy dandy little tuner and find, oh, yep, sure enough, this left mangrove is a little sharp. So we're just going to pull that down a little bit. If they're detuned a little bit, that's kind of a old unison trick to thicken up a voice. But I think I want these to be pretty spot on. So that looks good. And that looks good too. Oh, it's a little sharp. I'll pull that one down using the fine-tune knob. On the Mangrove specifically, I always tap the square outputs because almost none of the knobs or other functions, when not patched, affects the square. So I'm not getting weird harmonics that'll throw off the tuner. So that's pretty good. I've already tuned the Three Sisters by ear. Since we're going to be using it as a percussive element today, I want it to self-resonate. So the quality or resonance knob is set very high, and I know that this is close enough. Obviously, when you're doing percussion tuning, can be a little bit rougher. So that should do it there. One of the reasons I wanted to pre-patch this over here is so that we can immediately start hearing sounds. So you'll notice that I kind of patch from two directions, starting with the output block here, and then starting from the CV source over here. So what's next? Well, let's start getting some sound out of this stuff. So let's take the formant outputs of each mangrove, and we're going to patch these into the left and right output, left and right inputs of the cold Mac. And I'm finding I need a longer cable for this. Oop. So in the background, you're probably going to hear some sound already because I've got the clouds is already providing a little bit of reverb. We'll introduce some delay with that later on. And the VCAs on the mangroves don't exactly completely close. So let's see what we can hear. So let's go for the this mangrove, which is tuned 1 octave lower than that mangrove. Oh, look, we have a C. That's great. And we've got full tonal control there. This is set to constant wave mode. And then over here, this mangrove is an octave higher, and it's set to constant formant mode. So that's sure enough. And here we can immediately hear what makes the mangrove really unique, is that you can not only add harmonic overtones, you can actually chunk down to harmonic undertones. Anyone who's familiar with my Blue Box album will recognize that kind of sound from the very first track on the album. So, cool. These are passing signal. They're in tune. That's great. But this is a sequencer, and we're going to play an arpeggio on this. So let's get the sequencer going, and I can do that just by holding down a couple of notes on the touchplate keyboard and hitting the hold button. And it's probably hard to see, but now there are lights flashing here because this is now running, but the Tirana isn't running. So what we need to do there is I will use white cables for clock and stuff like that. If I can find a short one. And we're going to take the 4th gate output and put that into the clock for a Tirana. Oh, there we go. Now we've got some bassline stuff kind of going, kind of a somber tone. It is a rainy day here today. And it's actually firing only every 4th quarter note, which is great because I want that to move more slowly than the main melody. I can turn that up, but right now it's just going between 2 C's. Actually, same C. Ah, there we go. It was stuck on an undertone. So now it's randomly going from a low, kind of a middle C to a slightly higher C. So I'll hit the hold button to stop that sequence and turn these guys down. So that's cool. So now I've got another voice I need to introduce, which is the 3 sisters. So I want that to be on a slightly odd meter compared to everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 3rd gate output out of the touchplate sequencer, which will fire every 3rd. So this will be going basically in 3/4 time. And I'm going to patch that into the strike input of the 6 decibel per octave low pass gate on the LXD. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to patch the low pass the low pass filter output into the low pass gate's input, and then I'll take the low pass gate's output. And this is one of my favorite tricks on the Cold Mac, is that there's a jack called offset. And if you patch something into there, that can be a 3rd input. So you can do left and right and offset. So I'm going to use that as an audio input. And I'm going to start the sequencer going again. Ooh. And now we hear kind of a low, thumpy tom or kick-like sound. Now the problem is that that's actually kind of loud in the mix, and I want a lot more control over that. So how am I going to achieve that? Well, what I'm going to do is I need to attenuate that somehow. I want to fade it in and out of the composition. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going into the offset, I'm going to hop that up here to this attenuator, and then I'm going to take the attenuator output and throw that into the offset. So now, if I start the arpeggiator again, we hear nothing until I turn up that control. So now I have some level control over the volume of that, which is great because I want that to kind of build and release over the course of the composition. So that's cool. Let me just go ahead and I'm going to choose some notes. I'm going to say C, D sharp, F sharp, A, and C. And then somehow with this other finger, I'm going to have to hit the hold button. And that's going to start an arpeggio. So let's listen to what that sounds like. So right now, it's a random arpeggio. Let's go to just playing them up. Not that interesting. Let's go into down. A little bit more sinister, but really predictable. I still like random, so we're going to have a randomly playing melody. Let's now turn up the other mangrove here and see how my voltage settings on the Tirana are playing against the main melody. Got to tune this third one a little bit. That's close enough. One of the things that is interesting about the Tirana and a lot of simple sequencers like them is that you often want to run the CV output through an attenuator to clamp down on the output voltage ranges because these knob throws go, I think, from 0 to 5 or even 0 to 8 volts. So exact tuning on these can be a little fiddly. So that's all working. Let me actually set that arpeggio up again, and let's introduce our third voice as well and just see how they all play together. So we have this kind of 4-step rhythm here, a 3-step rhythm with the kick drum, and then kind of a 5-note random melody on top. So that's kind of interesting, and then of course we can play with clouds and get some nice delay going. Okay, but we're not in performance mode yet. We're still trying to figure out our sound design a little bit. So all that works, but I want things to sound much pluckier. So I need to start using my envelope generator. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the first primary gate output and I'm going to patch that. Oh, I'll get a shorter cable actually. Shorter cable. So gate 1 into, let's say that one, and then we'll take the, let's see, what else do I want? Then I'll take the second gate output, even though I'm not tapping its voltage, and I'll actually go into this guy. So I'm going to set up a simple 2-note arpeggio, and you should now see these guys fire right here. So that's handy, but of course it's not patched into anything yet. So one of the reasons I love the mangroves and the reasons why I can fade them in and out without a VCA is that they have built-in VCAs. So now all I have to do is I just need to take, let's see, get another really short cable here. I'm going to take the output of one of these envelopes. I'm going to put that into the air input. Air is the fancy name for the VCA. In the mangroves, and I'll take the slower trigger and I'll send that into my other mangrove. So let's hear what that sounds like. Starts to sound like a real sequence. Let's do that on the bass line. So now I've got a note change every 4th beat on the Tirana, but it's firing every other beat. So we're getting 2 notes per. So that's kind of cool. So that's working. We can play a little bit with the ramp. Ooh, see, that's nice and soft, but I want to go there during the actual performance. So I'm going to pull this back. make it much sharper, and we'll play with the time. We'll talk about why we'll do that in a second. So now that's all fun, but let's add some more variation to the timbres, because it sounds really, really monotone to me in terms of character or timbre. So let's talk about the Dixie Mark I. So this is a VCO, but it's running in LFO mode, so it's running very slowly. I'm going to use this for control voltage instead of sound. So I'm going to take its sine wave LFO output, and I'm going to patch that, let's patch it right into the formant control on this mangrove. Let me start that really simple sequence again. Turn this down. So that adds a certain animation to the voice, but I don't want it going quite that low. It's going to start fighting with the kick drum. And that's, of course, without. So what I'll do is I'll put that into the attenuator, which is now all the way down, and the attenuator output will go back into the formant control. So now the amount of control we're going to hear should vary based on this knob being thrown. There we go. So a little bit more subtle, but it's got some animation and some movement. One of the other fun things I like to do with these two mangroves is actually to FM themselves or FM them together at musical intervals. So right now these are exactly 1 octave apart. What would happen if I actually FM'd this guy with this one's square output? Let's see what that does here. Not a ton, but that's because there's an FM index going in here that I would like to control somehow too. Right now the FM index is set to 0, and these don't have FM index knobs. So I'm going to take the triangle wave, I think we'll try the triangle wave, out of the Dixie, throw that into an attenuator, and then take that, put that into the FM index. So this is how much FM will actually be happening. And let's just see if that does anything. Oh, it would help if we heard it, wouldn't it? All right, let's turn air down on this one. Here we go. Ooh, yeah. Adds a little bit of a overtone squelchiness to it. And that's going to be musically, of course, related to this LFO, which is not clocked by anything. So this is something that will fade in and out completely on its own rhythm, separate from the actual music. So that's kind of cool. Let me pull up the other one. And of course the two are tied together because both control voltages are going to be in the same phase. That's kind of cool. Okay, so we got something going on there. That's kind of cool. We'll turn all that stuff down. One of the things you will also hear really carefully, I'm ducking this out in the edit, but if you listen carefully right now, you can actually hear both mangroves going. Their VCAs don't completely close all the way. So something to be aware of. Okay, so, geez, what do I want to do next? I think what I want to do is I want to get a little bit more savvy about how I'm using Cold Mac. If I actually set these voices going again, and I use the big knob on Cold Mac, it doesn't do anything. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is the reason is because I'm just taking direct outputs and going into the left-right inputs. And then I have a little jack here, a little jack light, which I'm using to defeat the normal purpose of this knob, which is to pan left and right. With this pulled out, now there's stereo separation. And what this does is it actually swaps left and right. So I don't know, that's kind of cool. I might use that at some point in the patch, but that's not really kind of what I was intending. So that's let's put that back in, and you'll hear it collapse back down to mono. So what I want to do is I want to use this as a crossfader for one of these voices. So Cold Mac is pretty complicated, so I'm going to have to try to remember how this works. But I think what I want to do instead is take these guys out. I'll get the order right here. So I want to take this into OR and this into AND then take their outputs and go into left and right. Let's see if this does what I expect it to. It's the fun part about patching, you're never quite sure. Okay, that crossfades just from one to the other. Ooh. And that's a sensitive throw. Okay, that's not really what I want. So let's hop these guys down. And we'll go into and slope, because I think what this should do, hopefully, is crossfade only one of the sources. Let's see what happens. Ah, okay. So now we're hearing the bass line. Now we're hearing both. All right, cool. So this actually will give me another kind of performance enhancing tool there. Let's see. I think that's starting to feel pretty good. I don't want to get this too overly complicated. So what I think I'd like to do is actually give this a spin. And let's actually try... So I think it's ready to take for a test drive. Let's go ahead and try this. I'm going to start, hopefully, by just having the this mangrove, the bass line, start. We're not going to hear the kick. We're not going to hear the melody. I'm going to do this kind of improvisationally, so I'm not sure how this is going to sound, but I'm actually going to start. I'm going to make note of where this guy is. He's just south of 8 hertz. 8 hertz envelope time. I'm going to crank that up to be the maximum. So this should hopefully sound fairly percussive. So I'm going to start percussive. This is the hope anyway. I'm going to try to start percussive, bring in the bass line, and then bring in the melody, evolve some timbres, get crazy with the delay, and then break the patch down. So let's do this. I'm going to, this is all the way down, that's all the way down, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do the following. I'm going to turn the arpeggiator off until I'm ready to start it. So that's a test spin, kind of turning into kind of a song. One of the things that I'll call out that I just did, which is interesting, that I honestly forgot while I was patching until I was in the moment and I remembered this feature, is that just friends as an envelope generator will not retrigger if an envelope is still within its cycle. So you'll notice, we'll do something really simple here. Let's start that again. I'm going to turn down all the other voices. You'll notice that when the time gets too long, it starts skipping or ignoring incoming gates because the envelope is still completing its cycle. So going from here to just slowing it down a little bit, we've cut the tempo in half. A lot of people don't like that behavior, but I always find that super, super handy for expressive performance. You could even make it longer. When that adds some little trills at the end where you hear the note changing before the envelope closes. So, hope that was interesting and helpful. And any questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm at noisejockey, all one word, on Twitter. And you can also find me at nathanmoody.bandcamp.com. Thanks a lot for your time, and I hope that was helpful.